Seville, September 1519. 5 ships are pulling out of the harbour with 270 men aboard, and the man who organised all of it is standing on the deck of the lead vessel, about to attempt something nobody in history has ever done. 3 years after that morning, one ship comes back. 18 men are on it. They are so weak that they cannot walk unassisted, and when they step onto the dock they discover they have lost a day. The calendar in their hands says one date, the calendar in Seville says another, and nobody on earth yet understands why. 270 men left. 18 came home. What happened to the other 252 is the reason we're here tonight. The man on that deck is Ferdinand Magellan. He has 5 ships, a Spanish king's money, a Portuguese passport he can never use again, and a theory that most of the experienced navigators in Europe consider nonsense. Let's go with them. If you're here to sleep or relax, you're in the right place. So settle in, get comfortable, and enjoy the journey. And before we begin, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like, and I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I never get tired of seeing one person halfway through a Tuesday afternoon and another one lying in the dark at 3 in the morning, both on the same ship. So what is the theory? It sounds simple when you say it out loud, which is exactly why it fooled everybody. Magellan believes there is a way through South America. Not around it, through it. Everyone in Europe already knows the continent is there. Ships have been running down that coastline for 20 years, mapping it, trading, looking for the gap, and every single one of them has come back and reported the same thing. It keeps going. You sail south, and the land is still on your right. You sail further south into colder and colder water, and the land is still on your right. Bay after bay opens up. Every one of them looks like the way through, and every one of them closes into a dead end. Magellan thinks the gap is real, and that everyone has simply not gone far enough south to find it. And he has a second idea, which is the one that makes this worth a king's money. The Spice Islands. It is hard to explain now how much those islands mattered. A small cluster of volcanic islands in what is today Indonesia, and for a long stretch of history they were the only place on the planet where cloves and nutmeg grew. Not the main source, the only source. Everything in Europe came through a chain of middlemen, local traders, then Arab merchants, then Venetian ships, and every hand it passed through multiplied the price, until a sack of cloves in a European market was worth more than its weight in silver. And it is worth understanding why they mattered so much, because spices were expensive does not really cover it. Cloves and nutmeg were not seasoning in the way we think of seasoning. They were medicine in a world with almost no effective medicine. They were preservative. They were status, the visible proof at a table that a household could afford something that had crossed the entire known world to get there. Nutmeg in particular was believed to protect against plague, which meant that during outbreaks its price could go somewhere close to insane, and the supply chain was absurd. Cloves grew on a handful of small volcanic islands. Local traders moved them to Malay ports. From there they went west through Indian merchants, then Arab traders, then across to Venice, then out into Europe. And at every one of those transfers someone took a cut and the price multiplied. By the time a sack of cloves reached a market in Antwerp or London, it had been marked up so many times that the original grower would not have recognized the number. Fortunes were being made along a chain thousands of kilometers long, and the people at the European end had no idea what the price at the source actually was. Magellan's proposal was, in essence, to cut out every middleman on Earth at once. Portugal had found a route to them by going east, around Africa, and Portugal had no intention of sharing it. The Spanish were locked out. So Magellan walks into the Spanish court with a proposal that is close to audacious. Find the passage through South America, cross whatever ocean is on the other side, and reach the Spice Islands from the opposite direction. Come at them from the east. Break Portugal's grip completely. And here is the part that turns a business proposal into an international incident. Ferdinand Magellan is Portuguese. He was born in Portugal. He served the Portuguese crown for years, in India, in Malacca, in Morocco. He was wounded in Portuguese service and walked with a limp for the rest of his life because of it. He asked his own king to fund this voyage, more than once, and his own king refused him and eventually dismissed him from the court entirely. And you should know what he had already survived before any of this, because it explains the man. He went out India as a young man in a fleet of 22 ships, and he stayed in the East for years. He was at Malacca, the great trading city on the strait that controls the route between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, when the Portuguese took it. He was wounded there. He was wounded again in Morocco, badly enough that he limped for the rest of his life. And it was in Morocco that his career ended over an accusation. He was charged with trading illegally with the enemy, with selling livestock back to the Moors he was supposed to be fighting. The charge was never proven. It may well have been false. It did not matter. He came home under a cloud and the court never fully lifted it. He asked his king for a small increase in his pension, the kind of routine recognition given to a wounded veteran, and was refused. He asked to lead a voyage west. Refused. He asked again. Refused again. And finally he asked the king directly whether he might offer his services elsewhere, and the king told him he could go wherever he liked. That is the moment. A wounded soldier with a limp and a ruined reputation is dismissed by his own country with a shrug, and he takes the most valuable idea in Europe across the border and gives it to the enemy. So he renounced his nationality and took the plan to Portugal's chief rival. Understand how that lands. This is a man carrying detailed operational knowledge of Portuguese trade routes, Portuguese ports, and Portuguese naval capability, walking into the court of the one power that most wants that information. From Lisbon's point of view, he is not an explorer with a good idea. He is a traitor. And Portugal does not simply grumble about it. They send agents to Seville to disrupt the preparations. They try to have the fleet stopped before it sails, and when it does sail, they send warships after it. Magellan is not just racing toward an unknown ocean. He's being hunted before he clears the coast of Africa. Now let me show you the ships, because the scale of this is genuinely difficult to hold in your head. 5 vessels. The largest is around 120 tons. To put that in something you can picture, these are ships roughly the length of a modern tennis court, and they're about to attempt a voyage of some 60,000 kilometers through waters that have no maps, no charts, no rescue, no resupply, and no possibility of contact with home. There is no way to signal for help. There is no way to send a message. If a ship goes down, nobody in Spain will know for years, if ever. Below deck, the conditions are worse than most people imagine. There are no bunks for the crew. Men sleep on the deck, on coils of rope, wherever they can wedge themselves. The food is salted meat, hard biscuit, dried fish, and water that goes bad within weeks. The ships leak constantly and have to be pumped by hand around the clock, in shifts, forever. And I want to give you a proper sense of what a day aboard one of these ships is, because the discomfort is not incidental to this story. It is the story. The watch system runs in 4-hour blocks around the clock, which means that for 3 years, no man on board ever sleeps more than 4 hours in a row. Not once. The ship's day is measured by a sand glass. turned every half hour by a ship's boy, and if that boy falls asleep and forgets to turn it, the navigation for the entire day is wrong. Cooking is done in a firebox of sand on the open deck and only in decent weather. In bad weather, nobody eats anything hot at all for days at a time. There is no lavatory. Men use the open rail at the head of the ship in whatever the sea is doing. Below deck it is dark and it is wet and the entire hull is alive. Rats are constant. So are cockroaches, in quantities that men from that century wrote about with genuine disgust. And the worst of it is invisible. The shipworm, a saltwater mollusk that burrows into the timbers below the waterline and eats them from the inside. A hull can look sound and be honeycombed. Every ship on this voyage is being eaten while it sails, and there is nothing anyone can do about it in open water. The pumps run constantly, not occasionally, constantly in shifts, because the ships leak all the time and stopping means sinking. That is the baseline. That is a good day. And these men are not a national crew. They are a mix from all over Europe: Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Greek, French, German, and a small number from Africa and Asia, many of them speaking no common language beyond what they picked up on the docks. They do not particularly trust each other, and most of them from the beginning do not trust the Portuguese captain in charge. That distrust turns into the deepest fracture on this expedition, and it is going to happen faster than anyone expected. The fleet crosses the Atlantic and reaches South America without disaster, and for a while it almost looks easy. Give them this one good stretch, because it is the last easy month any of them get. They stop in a bay on the Brazilian coast, and the men who have been eating salted meat for months come ashore into a place that must have felt like a hallucination. Fresh fruit, fresh water, warm air, pineapples and sugarcane and sweet potatoes, none of which most of these men have ever tasted. There is an Italian nobleman aboard named Antonio Pigafetta, and he is the reason we know almost everything about this voyage in the detail we do. He signed on as a passenger, essentially a tourist, with the intention of writing down what he saw. He's going to keep writing for 3 years. He is going to survive. And his account is the closest thing we have to standing on that deck. Pigafetta records everything in Brazil with obvious delight, and then the fleet turns south, and then the coast starts to change under them. Warm becomes cool. Cool becomes cold. The green disappears and the land goes flat and brown and empty. Every few days a wide opening appears in the coastline, and every time hopes rise on all 5 ships, and they turn in and explore it. And every time it closes. Picture what that does to a crew, repeated over and over. The lookout calls. Every man not asleep comes up on deck. The ships turn in toward the opening, and for a few hours there is genuine hope on all 5 vessels. This is it. This is the one. We are through. We are going home rich. The water widens. The land pulls back on both sides. And then, hours or days later, the 2 shores curve toward each other and meet. And there is a beach at the end of it, and it is over. Back out. Turn south. Colder water. Now do that 30 more times and you have their year. They do that again and again and again, down a coastline of thousands of kilometers for months. Every single time the hope is real because it has to be. A crew that stops hoping stops working. They find a bay so enormous that for a while they are certain this is it. It is the estuary of the Rio de la Plata, and it is wide enough to look like open sea. They sail into it and keep sailing, and the water gradually turns fresh instead of salt, which can mean only one thing. It is a river, not a passage, just a very large river. Turn around, keep going south. You can feel the year draining away. And now the season begins to work against them. In the southern hemisphere, the year runs backwards from the one these men grew up with. As Europe warms into summer, this coast is sliding toward winter. The days get shorter, the wind gets colder and harder, ice forms on the rigging. By the end of March 1520, they are at a bleak, treeless bay at around 49 degrees south, and Magellan makes the only sane decision available. They cannot continue in this weather. They will winter here on this shore and wait for spring. He calls the place Puerto San Julian. Remember the name. More happens there than anywhere else on this voyage except one beach in the Philippines, and he cuts the rations. Now put yourself on one of those ships. You are 6 months from home. You have sailed further south than any European has gone on this coast. You are anchored off an empty, frozen shoreline where nothing grows. Winter is closing in, and there is no way to know how long it will last. The passage everyone was promised has not appeared, and the man who promised it is Portuguese, and he has just cut your food. And you should understand what wintering there actually meant, because it is 5 months, not a few weeks. Picture where they are stopping. Puerto San Julian is a wide, shallow, treeless bay, and there is nothing there. No forest for firewood, no fruit, no farmland, nothing to hunt on any reliable scale. The wind comes off the interior constantly and it never stops. The temperature falls below freezing and stays there. Men are living on ships that were built for the tropics, wearing clothes issued in Seville in a southern winter. There is nothing to do. That is the part people underestimate. 5 months of scraping and repairing and pumping and waiting on short rations in the dark half of the day, with nowhere to walk to and nothing to look at. And every man aboard is doing the same arithmetic in his head. We have come this far south, and there is no passage. The maps are wrong, or the man is wrong. And if the passage does not exist, then every mile we sail from here is a mile further from any hope of getting home. There are 3 Spanish captains in this fleet, commanding 3 of the 5 ships, and they have been unhappy since Seville. They are noblemen. They resent taking orders from a foreigner, and they have now decided that this voyage is a fantasy that is going to kill everybody aboard. The move comes after dark on the 1st of April, 1520. 30 armed men take the San Antonio, the largest ship in the fleet, in the dark. Its loyal captain is overpowered and put in irons. By morning, 3 of the 5 ships are in the hands of the mutineers. Magellan has 2, and the mutineers do something that tells you they think they have already won. They send him a letter. They are not trying to kill him. They are trying to negotiate. They want him to acknowledge that they now have the fleet and to accept terms. And here is where they have misjudged the man completely. Magellan replies inviting them to come to his ship and talk, and then he sends a boat across to one of the captured vessels carrying a small party of men, one of whom is carrying a concealed weapon, and they are received aboard as messengers. The rebel captain on that ship is killed within moments of taking the letter from their hands. Magellan's men take control of the deck immediately, and a second boat of armed loyalists arrives behind them. 1 ship recovered. In minutes, he then moves both loyal vessels to block the harbour mouth. The remaining 2 rebel ships are now trapped in a bay with no exit, in the middle of a South American winter, thousands of miles from anywhere, and they have nowhere to go. They surrender by morning. What follows is deliberately, coldly, publicly severe. There are trials. There are executions. 1 senior conspirator and a priest are marooned, put ashore on that empty coast with supplies, and left behind when the fleet eventually sails, which everyone aboard understands is a death sentence dressed up as mercy. Nobody ever hears from them again. And one of the men pardoned in that process, one of the mutineers Magellan chose not to execute, because the fleet needed experienced officers more than it needed revenge, is a Basque sailing master named Juan Sebastián Elcano. Hold that name. It is going to matter enormously later, and almost nobody knows it. The mutiny is over in less than 48 hours, but the fleet that sails out of that bay in the spring is not the same fleet that sailed into it. Something has broken between these men and their commander, and it does not repair. Magellan has proven he cannot be removed. He has not proven he is right. And they have not even reached the hard part yet. Before they leave that bay, two more things happen, and one of them is a story that follows this voyage for centuries afterward. The first is a shipwreck. Magellan sends one of his vessels, the Santiago, south on a scouting run, while the rest wait out the winter. It is caught in a storm and driven onto rocks and destroyed. The crew survive, almost all of them, and then have to walk back up the coast in the middle of winter to reach the others. Two men make the journey overland first to raise the alarm, and it takes them 11 days. 5 ships are now 4. Keep counting them down with me. The second thing is the encounter that made this coastline famous in Europe for the next 300 years. For weeks the fleet sees no one at all. This shore appears completely empty, and then, one day, a man walks down onto the beach near the ships. Pigafetta writes that he was extraordinarily tall, so tall that the Europeans, by his account, came up to his waist. That is obviously an exaggeration, and we should say so plainly. But there is a real observation buried inside it. The people of that region, the Tehuelche, were genuinely tall by the standards of 16th century Europeans, who were considerably shorter than people today. They were also wearing thick fur leggings and large hide boots stuffed with straw for warmth, which made their feet and legs look enormous. Magellan's men called them Patagones, which is where the name Patagonia comes from, and out of that came one of the most persistent geographic myths in European history. For 3 centuries afterward, maps of South America carried a region marked as the land of giants, and sailors arriving there fully expected to meet people twice their height. Serious scientific expeditions were still trying to settle the question in the 1700s. An exaggerated description in a travel diary, written by an enthusiastic Italian on a freezing beach, and it stayed in the atlases of Europe for 300 years. The first contact was friendly. There was dancing, gift-giving, curiosity on both sides. Pigafetta spent time with these people and did something genuinely valuable. He wrote down a vocabulary list of their language, one of the earliest records of any Patagonian language that exists. And then Magellan decided he wanted to bring some of them back to Spain as living proof of what he had found, and had 2 of them seized by a trick, and the friendliness ended. Pigafetta, who had spent weeks with them and had sat down and learned words from them, kept writing about one of the 2 long after, recording his name, the things he said, the fact that he learned a few words of the visitor's language, that he was frightened by the ship, that he grew ill. Neither of them survived the voyage. Both died at sea, thousands of kilometers from that shore, on ships heading somewhere they had never asked to go. That is the pattern of this entire expedition, and it repeats, a genuine moment of human contact, curiosity in both directions, and then a decision made in the interest of the mission that poisons it. On the 18th of October 1520, spring arrives at last, and the 4 remaining ships sail south again. 3 days later they see another opening in the coast. Nobody gets excited anymore. They have done this a dozen times. Everyone has been a dead end, and this one looks worse than most. A narrow gap between cliffs leading into dark water, with mountains and ice behind it. Several of the officers argue it is obviously another bay and they should not waste supplies. Magellan sends 2 ships in to check, and then a storm blows up while they are inside it, and for 2 days the men waiting outside assume both vessels have been destroyed on the rocks. There is nothing to be done. No way to help, no way to see, no way to know. On the 2nd day, sails appear coming back out of the gap. Both ships, intact, and their crews are firing their guns and shouting and hanging flags off the rigging. The storm had driven them deeper into the channel instead of destroying them. They had been pushed through one narrows and found another bay, and then another narrows, and they had tasted the water. Still salt. Deep into the land, no fresh water, no river silt. And the tide was flowing the wrong way. Water was pushing in from the far end, which meant there was a sea at the other end of it. This is the moment. 2 years of dead ends and closed bays and a mutiny and executions and a lost ship and a frozen winter, and it is real, and it is right here, and it is the entrance to the passage that everyone told them did not exist. They go in. And if you want one moment out of tonight to hold on to, this might be it. Every expert said this did not exist. The map said it did not exist. 3 of his own captains rose against him over it, and it is here, and he was right, and he is sailing into it. And what follows is one of the strangest pieces of navigation in maritime history. The strait is over 500 kilometers long. Hold that number, because it is not a channel you sail down in an afternoon. It is not a channel. It is a labyrinth, a shattered maze of islands, dead-end fjords, blind channels, and branching arms, with cliffs rising sheer on both sides, glaciers hanging above the water, and a wind that howls down it constantly. The tides run hard and unpredictably. The water is so deep in places that anchoring is impossible. They take 38 days to get through it, and I want to slow down inside those 38 days, because this is one of the great feats of navigation in history, and it is usually summarized in a sentence. You have no map. There cannot be a map. No European has ever been here. So the method is brute force and nerve. When the channel splits, and it splits constantly, they anchor the fleet and send the ship's boats ahead under oars to find out which arm continues and which one dies. Those boats are gone for hours, sometimes days. The men rowing them are going into a freezing labyrinth in an open dinghy, with no certainty of finding their way back to the ships. The walls of the channel go up sheer on both sides, hundreds of meters, with snow on the tops and glaciers hanging in the valleys above the water. In places the water is so deep right up to the rock that anchoring is impossible, and a ship that loses the wind has nothing to hold on to, and the wind is the real enemy. It funnels down that strait with a force that sailors still talk about today, and it can reverse. A fleet under sail can be running well 1 hour and pinned against a cliff face the next. The tides run hard through the narrows, and getting the timing wrong means being swept sideways into rock. They do all of it in near-freezing conditions, in leaking ships, on reduced rations, having already buried men and executed others. 38 days of that. At night they see fires burning on the southern shore. Not one. Many, at different distances, along the length of that coast, night after night, in a land they have been told is empty. Imagine standing a night watch and counting them. Nobody comes out to the ships, nobody signals, no boat is ever seen. The fires simply burn, and the ships pass, and the men on deck stand and look at them in the dark and do not go ashore to find out. We know now who was lighting them. The peoples of that archipelago, the Selknam, the Yagan, the Kaweskar, had been living in that country for thousands of years, in one of the harshest inhabited climates on Earth, and they kept fires burning almost permanently, including in their canoes, because in that cold and that wet, losing your fire could kill you. So the fires were not a signal, and they were not a warning. They were simply people staying alive, doing what they had done for millennia, watching 4 strange ships thread past their coast in the dark. The Europeans named the whole land after them without ever meeting them. Tierra del Fuego, land of fire. And deep inside that maze the fleet loses another ship, but not to weather. The San Antonio, the largest vessel, carrying the largest share of the fleet's supplies, is sent to explore one of the branching channels. It never comes back. The others search for it. They wait. They light signal fires. They leave messages in marked containers on shore in case it returns and finds them gone. It does not return because its crew have taken the ship, arrested their own captain and turned it around. They sail back through the strait, out into the Atlantic and all the way home to Spain, where they will arrive months later and tell the court a version of events in which Magellan is a tyrant and the voyage a catastrophe. Magellan does not know any of this. All he knows is that a third of his remaining food supply has vanished into a channel and did not come out. 4 ships are now 3, and they have not reached the ocean yet, and ahead of them, on the far side of the last narrows, the water opens up and there is no more land on either side. Just ocean, flat, blue, and unbelievably calm. Magellan gives it a name based on the only quality he can observe from where he is standing. Mar Pacifico, the peaceful sea. He believes he's a few weeks from the Spice Islands. He's about to find out that the ocean in front of him is the largest single feature on the surface of the Earth, that it covers roughly a third of the planet, and that absolutely nobody in Europe has any idea it is there. Here is what they thought was in front of them. Here is the assumption in their heads, and it is the reason for everything that follows. Every calculation available in Europe in 1520 said the world was smaller than it is. Ptolemy's figures had been in circulation since antiquity, and they put the circumference of the planet significantly below the real number. Columbus had made the same error in the other direction, which is why he died insisting he had reached Asia. On the best maps in existence, the gap between South America and the Spice Islands is a modest stretch of water, 3 or 4 weeks of sailing, perhaps a little more. The actual distance is around 13,000 kilometers. Sit with that gap for a second. They have provisioned for a month. The crossing is going to take more than 3. Remember the number we started with. 270 men left Seville. At this moment, as they clear the last of the land, a little over 200 are still alive. The ocean in front of them is going to take 19 more, and it is going to take them slowly. They sail on the 28th of November, 1520. The first week is genuinely pleasant, and you would not have worried either. The wind is steady behind them, the sea is glassy, the sun is warm after months of southern winter. Pigafetta writes about how calm and beautiful it is. The second week is the same. The third week is the same. The fourth week is the same. And then something starts to become apparent that nobody wants to say out loud. They are not finding anything, and you have to picture the daily rhythm of that to feel it. Not islands, not birds, not seaweed, not the shallow green water that means land is near. Nothing. In every direction, to every horizon, in every hour of daylight, there is water and there is sky, and there is nothing else at all. Understand how strange that is even by the standards of the 16th century. Sailors expect empty stretches, but sailors also expect islands, and there are thousands of islands scattered across the Pacific. Magellan's course, by pure statistical misfortune, threads almost perfectly between them. He crosses the largest ocean on the planet and touches almost nothing. 3 weeks becomes 4. 4 becomes 6. The water starts to go bad. Stored in wooden casks in the tropics, it turns yellow, and then it develops a smell that makes men gag, and they have to hold their noses to drink it, and they drink it anyway because there is nothing else. The biscuit, the hard dry ship's bread that is the base of every meal, runs out. What is left is the dust and crumbs at the bottom of the barrels, and that dust is full of maggots, and it has been fouled by rats until it stinks. Pigafetta records that they ate it anyway, powder and maggots and all, because it was food. 6 weeks becomes 8. And here is the psychological thing about that ocean that is worth sitting with, because it is not just hunger, it is sameness. Every morning is the same morning, the same flat blue in every direction, the same empty horizon, the same warm, steady wind pushing them west into more of it. There is no landmark to measure progress against. There is no way to know if you are halfway or a tenth of the way. Nothing changes and nothing changes and nothing changes, and the only thing that measurably moves is the amount of food left in the hold, which goes one direction only. Men in that situation do not simply get hungry. They stop believing the ocean has a far side. Pigafetta writes about men who became convinced they were sailing on a sea with no end at all, and it is hard to argue that was irrational because from where they stood there was no evidence against it. The dead go over the side. There is no ceremony that anyone has energy for by this point. A man is sewn into whatever cloth can be spared, and he goes over, and the ship keeps moving west at the same speed it was moving before. 19 times. They eat the sawdust from the woodwork. That is not a figure of speech. They eat the rats when they can catch them. And Pigafetta records that a single rat sells for half a ducat between the men, a genuinely significant sum, and that even at that price there are not enough rats to go around. They take the ox hides that are wrapped around the main yard to stop the rigging chafing, and they cut them down, and they tow them behind the ship in the sea for days to soften them, and then they grill them over coals and eat the leather. And then scurvy arrives. Nobody at the time knows what causes it. It will be more than 200 years before anyone establishes the connection to fresh food. All these men know is what they can see happening to each other, and it is horrifying in a very specific way. It starts in the mouth. The gums swell. They swell so badly that the flesh grows over the teeth, and the men cannot eat, which of course accelerates everything. Old wounds that healed years ago open up again, because the body has stopped being able to hold its own tissue together. Men become too weak to stand watch, then too weak to sit up. 19 men die on that crossing. Around 30 more are so ill they cannot work at all, and they keep sailing. Because there is no alternative. There is no turning back. The wind is behind them, and the strait is thousands of kilometers astern. There is nowhere to stop. There is no port, no shore, no aid, no possibility of rescue. The only survivable direction is forward, into more of the same nothing, on the hope that the ocean has an end. 98 days. Count that out against your own life for a moment. 3 months and a week, every day identical, on a boat you cannot leave. 3 months and 1 week of continuous open ocean, on rotten water and leather, with men dying every few days and being put over the side, and no land, and no way to know whether there is any land, ever. At one point Magellan takes the charts he's been carrying, the ones that told him this would take a month, and throws them over the side into the sea. It is the only moment in this entire voyage where the record lets you watch the man break. On the 6th of March, 1521, a lookout sights land. They have reached the islands we now call the Marianas, Guam and its neighbours, and the moment they arrive everything goes wrong, immediately and probably inevitably. Canoes come out to the ships. The local Chamorro people come aboard and they begin taking things. From their perspective, this is entirely reasonable. In Chamorro society, goods and tools were shared and used communally, and a vessel arriving in their waters was arriving into a system with rules that these strangers were now part of. From the perspective of starving European sailors who have just spent 3 months eating leather, it is theft, and it is worth putting the Chamorro side of this down properly, because the label Magellan slapped on those islands stuck for centuries and it was never true. The Chamorro had been living in the Marianas for something like 3,500 years by the time these ships appeared. They built enormous stone pillars, latte stones, as foundations for their houses, some of them several meters tall, cut and raised without metal tools. They were exceptional open water sailors with fast outrigger canoes that European observers, including these ones, admitted outsailed anything they had, and they operated on a system of reciprocal exchange. Goods moved, things were shared, borrowed, redistributed, and accounted for socially rather than by ownership in the European legal sense. A large vessel arriving in their waters and receiving hospitality was, by their rules, entering into that system, so when men went aboard and began taking items, they were not committing theft in their own understanding. They were participating. The Europeans, starving and armed and 3 months out of a nightmare, read it as robbery. It escalates fast. A small boat is taken from one of the ships. Magellan responds by going ashore with an armed party, burning houses and boats and killing several people. They take the food and water they need and they leave, and Magellan names the place the Islands of Thieves. That name stayed on European maps for centuries. A group of islands permanently labelled with an accusation because of a misunderstanding about property between people who had never met before and shared no language at all. And notice where the count stands now. Of the 270 who left, roughly 150 are still breathing. 2 ships out of 5 are gone. They are on the far side of the world from anyone who could help them, and they still have to get home. They sail west, and a week later they reach a far larger group of islands. They have arrived in the Philippines, and the last month of Ferdinand Magellan's life begins. Now, before anything happens in those islands, we should be clear about what the expedition had actually sailed into, because the sagas of European exploration have a habit of describing arrivals as though the destination began existing on the day the ships appeared. The Philippine archipelago in 1521 was not an empty stretch of islands waiting to be found. It was a densely populated, deeply connected part of the maritime trade world of Southeast Asia, and had been for centuries. Chinese porcelain moved through these waters, so did Indian textiles and gold, and Islamic trade networks reaching down from Borneo and Brunei. The coastal settlements had rulers, courts, tribute relationships, standing alliances and standing rivalries. There were skilled metalworkers, gold ornaments of real sophistication, and boats, outrigger vessels that could handle open water and that European sailors immediately recognized as fast. These were not people who had never seen a foreign ship. They had been trading with foreign ships for generations. What was new was the specific kind of foreigner arriving, and the specific thing he wanted. So when Magellan's ships come in, they are not discovering anything. They are arriving uninvited and heavily armed into a working political system with its own rivalries, and within weeks they are going to be used as a weapon inside somebody else's dispute, and they are not going to notice it happening. Something happens in the Philippines that stops the whole expedition in its tracks, and it is the strangest moment in the entire voyage. Magellan has a slave with him named Enrique. He acquired him years earlier in Malacca, in Southeast Asia, during his Portuguese service, and Enrique has been with him ever since, through Europe, through the Atlantic, through the Strait, through the Pacific. He is the expedition's interpreter. They anchor off an island, and local people come out in a boat, and Enrique calls down to them. And they answer him. They understand him. He understands them. After crossing an entire unmapped ocean in one direction from the west, Magellan's Malay-speaking servant is standing on a deck in the middle of nowhere, having a conversation with people he has never met. Whatever anyone aboard thought at that moment, here is what it actually meant. Enrique had been taken from this region years earlier and carried west to Europe, the long way, around Africa. Now he had come back the other way, across the Atlantic and the Pacific. He'd gone all the way around. There is a real argument made seriously by historians that Enrique is the first person in history to circumnavigate the globe, and that he did it as an enslaved man whose name most people have never heard. And think about what that moment must have been for him personally, separate from any question of records. He had been taken from this part of the world as a young man. He had been carried thousands of kilometers west to Europe, into a language he did not grow up with, into a climate he did not know, as another man's property. He had then been carried back across 2 oceans in the other direction, through starvation and scurvy and mutiny, in service to a plan that had nothing to do with him. And then one afternoon he leans over a rail and speaks, and a stranger in a boat answers him in words he has not heard since he was young. Whatever else was in that moment, he was close to home, closer than he had been in years. He would never get there. The expedition spends several weeks in the islands, and the relationships they build there are genuine and complicated. They reach the island of Cebu and meet its ruler, Raja Humabon, and what develops is a proper alliance, trade, feasting, ceremony. Humabon and hundreds of his people accept Christianity, which Magellan treats as the great achievement of his life. Something changes in Magellan during those weeks, and it shows in the record clearly enough that scholars still disagree about what to make of it. The man who crossed the strait was cautious, calculating, and relentlessly focused on the objective. The man in Cebu is not. He starts spending time on ceremony. He stages a mass baptism. He has a cross planted on a hill. He tells Humabon's people that their old images should be burned. He performs what he presents as a miracle, having a sick man brought to him and blessed, and the man recovers, and the effect on the islanders is enormous. He begins, in other words, to behave less like a fleet commander and more like a man on a mission from God. And he does it thousands of kilometers past the point where anyone could tell him to stop. His officers can see it. They say so. There is real tension aboard by this point between the men who want to load spices and go home, and the commander who has started treating the Philippines as the purpose rather than a stopover. And it is here, at the exact moment when everything is going well, that Magellan makes the decision that ends him. There is a nearby island, Mactan. Its leader, Lapu-Lapu, refuses to submit to Cebu's authority or to the Spanish. Humabon raises it as a problem, and Magellan volunteers to solve it. His own officers argue against it, strongly. The expedition's purpose is the Spice Islands, not local politics. They have 3 ships, a depleted crew, thousands of kilometers still to sail, and no reason whatsoever to fight a battle for someone else on an island they do not need. He goes anyway, with around 60 men, and he refuses Humabon's offer of 1,000 warriors as support, because he wants his allies to watch what European soldiers can do, They set out before dawn on the 27th of April 1521. Keep your eye on the water for the next few minutes, because the water is what decides this, and the first thing that goes wrong is the water. The reef around Mactan is broad and shallow, and the boats cannot get close to the beach, so Magellan and his men have to get out and wade in. Hundreds of meters of chest-deep water over sharp coral in armour, carrying weapons in the dark. Try that in your head for a moment. You're in steel, holding a crossbow above your head, walking on coral you cannot see, and the beach is still 400 meters away. Which means the ship's cannon are far behind them, out of effective range and useless. Waiting on the beach are, by Pigafetta's estimate, more than 1,000 of Lapu-Lapu's warriors. 60 men are coming ashore against them, slowly, on foot through water. And there is a delay before it even starts, which makes it worse. They arrive off the reef in darkness, and rather than land immediately, Magellan waits for dawn. He sends a message ashore offering Lapu-Lapu terms: recognize Spanish authority, pay tribute, and there will be no fight. The answer comes back that they have spears of their own, and that if the Spanish wish to come, they should come. So for a few hours before sunrise, 60 men sit in boats off a dark reef, in armour, listening to a shore they cannot see, knowing exactly how many people are waiting on it. The Europeans have armour and crossbows and firearms, but their armour covers the torso and head, and their legs are bare in the water. And Lapu-Lapu's men are not fighting the way European soldiers expect. They keep their distance, they use the terrain they have known their entire lives, and they aim low. And the firearms fail them in a way nobody planned for. A matchlock in 1521 is slow. It takes a long time to reload, and it needs a burning cord kept dry. The crossbows are better but not fast, and the men shooting them are standing in water, having waded hundreds of meters, exhausted before the fighting starts. Pigafetta records something that must have been terrible to watch. The Spanish firing volley after volley into the crowd on the beach, and the shots going into shields made of wood and hide, and the warriors simply absorbing it and coming on. It is one of the earliest clear moments where the assumed technological gap between Europeans and everyone else visibly does not hold. And then the arrows start finding legs. The armour ends at the thigh. Below that, nothing but wet cloth and water. Men start going down, and once a man in armour goes down in the shallows, getting him back up is close to impossible. The Spanish begin to fall back toward the boats, and the retreat gets ragged, and Magellan stays where he is to cover it. Pigafetta is right there. He's wounded himself, and he watches it happen. And what he writes is one of the most direct eyewitness passages in the whole of the Age of Exploration. He describes Magellan going down in the shallows with men still fighting around him, and he calls him their light, their comfort, and their true guide, a man who stayed behind so the others could get away. Ferdinand Magellan dies in knee-deep water on a beach in the Philippines, on the 27th of April 1521. He is roughly halfway home, and here is what makes it land if you let it sit. He has crossed the Atlantic, found the strait everyone said was imaginary, and crossed the largest ocean on the planet. He is one of the very few people alive who has any idea how big the world actually is, and he will never see the Spice Islands, which are only weeks away. He will never complete the circle. The voyage that carries his name in every history book is going to be finished by other people, and he is not going to be there for any of it. His body is never recovered. Lapu-Lapu refuses to return it, and there is no negotiation that changes that. Today there is a monument on Mactan, and it does not commemorate Magellan. It commemorates Lapu-Lapu as the first Filipino to resist European conquest and it stands on the beach where it happened. And what comes next is worse. With Magellan dead, the expedition's standing collapses overnight. The alliance with Cebu had been built on the belief that these strangers were powerful. 60 of them have just been beaten on a beach in front of everyone. A few days later, the Cebuano leadership invites the expedition's remaining officers ashore to a feast. Around 24 of them go. They do not come back. We do not know with certainty what triggered it, and the sources disagree. One version holds that Enrique, the interpreter, who by Magellan's will was to be freed on his master's death, and whom the surviving officers refused to free, went to Humabon and told him the Europeans intended to seize his people and that the feast was arranged as a response. If that is what happened, then the single most consequential act of the entire voyage after Magellan's death was carried out by a man the expedition had spent 3 years treating as property at the exact moment they told him he would remain property. We cannot prove it. Pigafetta believed it. It is the account he gives, and he was there, and he had reason to be bitter about it. What is not in doubt is the outcome. The survivors on the ships hear what is happening and cut their cables and get out, leaving men behind on that shore, and sail away from Cebu with almost no senior leadership left alive. The expedition has now lost its commander, most of its officers, and any illusion that it is in control of anything. And it has 3 ships and not enough men to sail them. The first thing they do is count, and this is the number the whole night has been walking toward. There are around 115 men left out of the 270 who sailed from Seville. That is not enough to crew 3 ships, so they take the Concepcion, strip everything useful out of her, and set her on fire, and watch her burn to the waterline. It is the only sensible decision available, and it must have been a bleak thing to stand and watch. 2 ships left out of 5, the Trinidad and the Victoria. Keep both names, because in a few minutes only one of them matters, and now, without their commander, they do something that has been dismissed for 500 years and probably should not be. They wander. For roughly 6 months, these 2 ships work their way through the islands of Southeast Asia, looking for the Spice Islands, without accurate charts, without their leader, and without any real idea where they're going. They stop constantly. They trade. They ask directions. They take on food and water. They pick up local pilots who know these waters and follow their advice. And in November 1521, more than 2 years after leaving Spain, after everything you have just sat through with them, they reach the Moluccas, the Spice Islands, the whole point of all of it. Read the scene Pigafetta describes when they arrive. The men fire every gun they have. After everything, the mutiny, the executions, the frozen winter, the labyrinth, the 98 days, the leather, the dead commander, the massacre. They are standing in the place the entire voyage was organized to reach. Sit in that for a second, because these are not the men who left Seville. Of the 270 who sailed, roughly 100 are still alive at this point, and every one of them has watched friends die of a disease nobody could name, has eaten leather, has buried a commander, has run from a beach. The idea that the Spice Islands even existed had been, for most of the past year, closer to a rumour than a destination. And now they are anchored off them, and the air smells of cloves, and it is real. They load cloves. They load until the ships are groaning with it. And they discover something that lands like a joke. The Sultan of Tidore is perfectly happy to trade with them, and the price of cloves at the source is so low, and the price in Europe is so absurdly high, that the cargo 2 ships can carry is worth a fortune large enough to fund the entire expedition several times over. And then, as they prepare to leave, The Trinidad springs a serious leak. She cannot make the voyage. She needs weeks of repair, so they split. The Trinidad will stay behind, repair, and then attempt to sail back east across the Pacific to Panama. The Victoria will take the western route, straight through Portuguese-controlled waters, all the way around Africa, and try to reach Spain. Both plans are terrible, and you can see it from here as clearly as they could. They pick them because there is nothing else on the table. The Trinidad's plan fails completely. She sails east, gets caught in contrary winds, is battered for months, loses most of her crew, turns back, and is captured by the Portuguese. Of the roughly 50 men aboard her, 4 survived to see Europe again, years later, after imprisonment, which leaves the Victoria. Her commander is a Basque officer named Juan Sebastian Elcano. Stay with him for a second, because if you remember one name out of tonight that you did not already know, it should be his. Elcano was not one of Magellan's loyalists. He was a mutineer. He took part in the rising at San Julian. He was on the wrong side of it, and he was pardoned and put back to work because the fleet could not afford to lose experienced sailors. He is one of the men Magellan spared, and now he is the one who has to get everybody home. His plan is straightforward, and once you hear it, you will understand why nobody sane would volunteer for it. Sail west, out of the Spice Islands, across the Indian Ocean, around the southern tip of Africa, and north to Spain. He must do this in a leaking, worm-eaten ship that has been at sea for 3 years, with a starving crew, and he must do it without stopping at any Portuguese port, which is nearly all of them, because if the Portuguese find them, this ship and its cargo and its crew are gone. So he sails a route deliberately far from land, and that means no resupply. Again, look at what he is actually attempting, because it is worse than the Pacific in one specific way. In the Pacific, the danger was the ocean. Out here, the ocean is dangerous, and so is every safe harbour on the route. The entire Western Sea Road, the coast of India, the mouth of the Red Sea, the East African ports, the islands off Africa, is a Portuguese system. Every place a starving crew would naturally stop for water is a place where this ship will be seized, and this crew imprisoned as traitors, because their commander was a Portuguese defector, and their cargo is proof of what they have done. So Elcano makes a decision that is close to unbearable. He will not stop anywhere. He will take a ship that has been at sea for 3 years, with a hull full of shipworm, and he will sail it across the Indian Ocean and around the whole of southern Africa without touching land. That means no fresh food, no fresh water beyond what is in the casks, no repairs, for months. The Indian Ocean crossing repeats everything the Pacific did. Food runs out, water runs out, men die and go over the side. They spend weeks trying to round the Cape of Good Hope in heavy weather, are beaten back and try again, and lose the foremast doing it. By the time they reach the Cape Verde Islands, off the west coast of Africa, they are so desperate for food that Elcano takes an enormous risk. Cape Verde is Portuguese. He sends men ashore with a cover story, that they are a Spanish ship returning from the Americas blown off course, and it works at first. They buy rice. They come back. And then the Portuguese officials notice something. The Spanish sailors are trading in cloves. Cloves do not come from the Americas. Cloves come from the Spice Islands, on the far side of the world, and there is only one possible way this ship has cloves aboard. The Portuguese seize the shore party immediately, 13 men, and Elcano, watching from the deck, understands within seconds what is about to happen to his ship and everything on it, and makes the hardest decision of the voyage. He cuts the cable and runs. He leaves 13 men behind on that beach, because staying means all of them are taken, and because the ship is now carrying not just a cargo but a discovery, the proof that the world can be sailed around, and the knowledge of how. There is one more thing about Cape Verde, and it is the detail I promised you at the very beginning of tonight. Now, the missing day. I told you at the very start of tonight that these men stepped onto a dock carrying a mystery nobody on Earth could explain. Here is where it actually surfaced, and it did not surface as a grand scientific revelation. It surfaced as an argument about a date. While the shore party was in Cape Verde buying rice, someone aboard did what sailors always do when they meet people who have been on land. He asked what day it was, and the answer was wrong. Pigafetta had kept a daily record for 3 years. He had not missed a day. He was meticulous, and he knew he was meticulous, and by his log it was Wednesday. The Portuguese in Cape Verde told him it was Thursday. He checked. He argued. He went back through his own count, and it was correct, and it was still wrong. They had lost a day. Somewhere in 3 years of sailing, an entire 24 hours had gone missing from the lives of every man aboard, and not one person on that ship could explain how. Here is what happened, and nobody on Earth understood it in 1522, because nobody had ever been in a position to notice it before. They had sailed west, continuously west all the way around the planet. Every day they travelled west, the sun rose fractionally later for them than for someone standing still in Seville. Individually, those fractions are unnoticeable. A few minutes a day, buried inside a day that already varies, but they accumulate, and after a full circuit of the Earth, those fractions add up to exactly one full rotation. 1 day. Sail all the way around the world going west, and you will arrive having personally experienced one sunrise fewer than everybody who stayed home. Nobody had ever done a full circuit before, so nobody had ever encountered it. It was not a theory anyone was testing. It was not a question anyone had thought to ask. It simply appeared as an accounting error in a diary in a harbour in Cape Verde, and it turned out to be a property of the planet. This is one of my favourite things in the whole of the age of exploration. They set out to find a trade route, and on the way they accidentally proved something about the nature of the Earth that no amount of sitting in a library could have produced. Pigafetta was so unsettled by it that he wrote about it at length. When the survivors reached Spain, it was reported to the authorities and eventually to the Pope, because it raised a serious practical problem. If you had lost a day, then every religious observance, every fast day, every holy day you had kept for 3 years had been kept on the wrong date. The line we now call the International Date Line exists because of a problem first noticed by exhausted sailors on the deck of a leaking ship in 1522. On the 6th of September 1522, the Victoria comes into Sanlúcar de Barrameda in southern Spain. 18 men. They have been away for 3 years less a few days. They left with 5 ships and 270 men, and there is 1 ship and 18 of them, and the ship is so eaten by shipworm and so continuously leaking that the crew had been pumping her by hand around the clock for the final months just to keep her floating. They are too weak to walk off unassisted. And before they do anything else, before food, before rest, before their families, they go ashore in their shirts, barefoot, carrying candles to the shrine to give thanks. Some of them had made that vow in the middle of the Pacific when they thought they were dying, and they honoured it while they could still barely stand. They were the first human beings to go all the way around the world, and the clothes in the hold of that one battered ship were worth more than the cost of the entire expedition. 5 ships, 3 years, all the wages and supplies. 1 cargo, it turned a profit. which is in a way the coldest fact in this whole story. On the ledger, the voyage was a success, and here is a detail about the arrival that says everything about how power works. Elkanah brought that ship home. He is the man who actually completed the first circumnavigation of the earth. And when he was called before the emperor, one of the first things he had to do was answer for the mutiny at San Julian 3 years earlier, because the deserters on the San Antonio had reached Spain long before him and had already told their version, and the court had been living with that account for 2 years. The man who finished the greatest voyage in history had to explain himself before he could be thanked for it. Elkanah was granted a coat of arms by the emperor, and on it was a globe, with an inscription meaning, "You went around me first." He went back to sea a few years later, on another expedition to the Pacific. He died in the middle of it, of malnutrition, on the ocean he had already crossed, and the rest of them. Pigafetta, the Italian tourist who signed on to see the world and ended up as the only reason we know any of this in detail, survived, went home, and spent years trying to get his account published. He presented a handwritten copy to the emperor. He gave copies to other patrons. And then, in one of the quieter injustices of this story, the official version of the voyage that circulated in Europe was largely written by other people, and Pigafetta's manuscript was not properly printed in full for a very long time. The man who was actually there, who kept the log every single day for 3 years, who was wounded at Mactan and watched his commander die in the water, was mostly a footnote for centuries. Nearly everything vivid you have heard tonight comes from him. The 13 men left behind on the beach at Cape Verde were eventually released, and some of them made it home. The 4 survivors of the Trinidad, the ship that tried to cross the Pacific eastward and failed, came back to Spain years later, after Portuguese imprisonment. They had been gone so long that they arrived into a world that had already finished telling the story of their voyage without them, and Magellan's own family did not survive him either. His wife and his young son both died in Seville while he was at sea, before any news of his death could have reached them. There was no one waiting at the dock for him. There had not been for a while. So what do you actually take from all of this? Before we get to the 2 ways of looking at this, it is worth naming exactly what those 18 men brought home, because it was not really the cloves. They brought back the size of the world, not as a theory, as a measured, sailed, survived fact. Before this voyage, every estimate of the Earth's circumference in Europe was a guess built on ancient arithmetic, and the guesses were badly low. After it, there was a number that could not be argued with, because a ship had gone all the way around and someone had been counting, and they proved the oceans connect. That is not obvious. Before 1522 it was entirely possible, as far as anyone in Europe could demonstrate, that the seas of the world were separate basins. After the Victoria came home, it was established that you can leave any port on the planet and, given enough time and enough luck, reach any other one by water. Everything that follows in the next 4 centuries, every trade route, every empire, every fleet, every consequence good and catastrophic, sits on top of that single proven fact. 18 men, 1 leaking ship, and the actual shape of the world. There are 2 honest ways to look at this, and holding one does not require dropping the other. It is true that this is one of the most astonishing feats of endurance in recorded history. Not the idea, and not the leadership, but the enduring. Men in wooden ships the size of a tennis court, with no charts, no rescue, no contact with home, eating leather and rats, watching their friends die of a disease no one could explain, sailing forward for 98 days on nothing but the hope that the water ended somewhere. 18 of them did that and lived. Whatever else you think about why they went, that is not a small thing. And it is equally true that this voyage arrived at every single place it went as an interruption in somebody else's world. The people on Guam lost their homes and their lives over a misunderstanding about a small boat. 2 Tehuelche men were tricked aboard a ship and died on it. The people of Mactan defended their island successfully and correctly against an attack nobody asked for. Enrique crossed the entire world and appears in the record only as property, and the whole enterprise was organized to break one European monopoly on spices and replace it with another, which is exactly what happened, and it went on to reshape those islands for centuries in ways nobody living there was consulted about. And there is one number underneath all of it that is easy to say quickly and worth slowing down for. 252 men did not come home on the Victoria. Some of them are accounted for. Executed, marooned, killed at Mactan or Cebu, dead of scurvy in the Pacific, captured by the Portuguese, deserted on the San Antonio. Many of them are not accounted for at all beyond a line in a list. They were sailmakers and carpenters and ship's boys and cooks. Most of them were poor. Most of them signed on because the wages were decent and the alternative was worse. Almost none of them had any stake in Portuguese trade monopolies or Spanish royal ambition. They went because it was a job. Neither reading needs to win before you fall asleep. We started this one on a dock in Seville with 5 ships and 270 men, and a theory most experts thought was ridiculous. We went south with them past every bay that promised a way through and closed. We wintered on a frozen empty shore where 3 captains decided their commander was going to kill them all, and watched him take his fleet back in under 2 days. We felt our way through a 500-kilometre labyrinth of ice and cliffs for 38 days, with fires burning on a shore nobody could identify. We came out the other side into a calm blue ocean nobody in Europe knew existed and sailed into it for 98 days on rotten water and grilled oxhide. We stood on a deck while a man spoke to strangers in his own language, and without anyone understanding it, closed a circle around the earth. We watched a commander refuse 1,000 allies, wade 300 meters through chest-deep water toward a beach he did not need to take, and die in the shallows. And then we came home the long way, around Africa, running from Portuguese ships, with 18 men left and a hold full of cloves and a missing day nobody could account for. A few threads never got tied off, and there is no need to tie them off now. Whether Magellan, in the last minutes on that reef, understood what he had already achieved, that the strait was real, that the ocean was crossed, that the world was round and sailable, and he had proved it. Whether Enrique, who had been carried west as property and came home east by accident, ever knew that he had gone all the way around before anyone, and what those fires on the shore of Tierra del Fuego actually were, burning in the dark, watched from a passing ship by men who never went to look and never found out. Nobody has answered that last one. The strait is still there, ships still use it, it still carries his name, and the wind still comes down it exactly as hard as it did in 1520. The reef at Mactan is still shallow, and the water is still warm, and you can wade out on it today. And somewhere on a Spanish coat of arms, there is a globe with a line around it, and 4 Latin words about being the first. If this saw you through the night, the like button is the whole signal. 1 tap, that is it, and it tells me to keep making them. Subscribe if you want the next voyage, and I will keep hunting down the versions of these stories that hold up when you check them, told slowly, in the dark, for as long as there are people listening. And because this whole thing ended on a calendar that did not match, tell me below what day it is where you are and what the clock says. I like knowing. Let the strait keep its wind. Let the fires on that shore stay unexplained. 18 men came back with a hole in the calendar, and the world has been keeping track of it ever since. Rest easy. The ocean they crossed is still out there tonight, still enormous, still mostly empty, doing exactly what it was doing the day they sailed into it with 3 weeks of hope and 98 days of water in front of them.